The morning began like any other, or at least, that's what I told myself as the elevator doors closed with a soft metallic sigh. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer ink. That familiar cocktail of ambition and exhaustion. Around me, people stood with the same tired grace they wore every morning, phones in hand, smiles rehearsed, eyes already halfway to their deadlines. I remember thinking how ordinary everything felt. Ordinary and safe. But safety has a strange way of disappearing quietly. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, the hum of keyboards greeted me like white noise. My desk waited in its usual corner, a small island of order, neat files, a half-dead plant, and the ceramic mug that read she believed she could. Funny, looking back. How quickly belief can be broken by a single meeting. Morning, I greeted Jenna from accounting. She looked up, her smile tight, eyes flickering away too quickly. Another colleague offered a polite nod, no warmth, just duty. Something in the air felt colder, like the temperature had dropped, but only for me. I brushed it off. I had learned to rationalize discomfort. Maybe they're busy, I told myself. Maybe I'm overthinking. At 10:04 a.m., the notification popped up on my screen. Meeting invite, Clara Roberts, HR restructuring update location. Executive office to be. My stomach tightened. Not fear. Not yet, just curiosity shaded by unease. I took my notebook, smoothed my blazer, and walked toward the glass-walled corner office. My reflection followed me in the hallway, calm, composed, professional. Exactly what I'd worked years to become. Inside, Clara was waiting. She stood by the window, the skyline stretching behind her like a painting of power and control. Her smile, immaculate as always, didn't reach her eyes. "Come in, Alara," she said. "Please sit." Her tone was gentle, practiced. The kind of voice that sounds compassionate until you notice how carefully it avoids real feeling. I sat. The chair felt too soft, too deliberate. She began with small talk. A few sentences about how valuable my contributions had been, how much the company had grown, how proud she was of the team's adaptability. And then came the line, the sentence that rewrote my life. "Unfortunately, with the new restructuring, your position is being eliminated." The words floated out like perfume, sweetly delivered, lethal underneath. For a moment, I didn't respond. I just stared at the sunlight tracing her desk, at the little crystal paperweight that shimmered between us. "Eliminated?" I finally asked, my voice steady. "Yes," she nodded, almost kindly. "This has nothing to do with performance. You've been exemplary. It's just business realignment, business realignment." The phrase rang in my ears like an echo in a marble hall. Cold, hollow, and irreversible. I'd given this company 7 years of my life. 7 years of late nights, quiet sacrifices, and silent loyalty. And now, all of it condensed into a sentence. "Just business, I see," I said softly. Claire smiled again, that same polite curve that could hide a dagger. "You'll, of course, receive your final paycheck by the end of the week. HR will handle the paperwork. Unfortunately, severance isn't being offered during this restructuring phase." My pulse stilled. No severance. No gratitude. Just dismissal, dressed in civility. For a second, I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. The meeting ended with her standing, signaling that my time, like my job, was up. "Thank you for understanding, Alara," she said, extending her hand. I looked at it, manicured, motionless, and shook it anyway. Because that's what dignity does when pride is bleeding. It smiles, straightens its spine, and walks out quietly. The hallway felt longer than before. Every step echoed too loudly, every face turned too quickly. I could feel the whispers, the kind that hide behind lowered eyes and half-open doors. At my desk, I packed slowly, notebook, mug, a photo of the last company retreat, all of us smiling, pretending loyalty meant something more than convenience. When I turned in my access badge, the receptionist avoided my gaze. Outside, the wind was sharp, colder than it should have been for spring. I stood there for a while, staring at the glass tower I had once called my second home. And in that stillness, I understood something I'd never dared to admit before in corporate worlds. Betrayal doesn't scream. It smiles, it shakes your hand. It thanks you for your service. I walked away that day with my box of belongings and a silence that felt heavier than grief. But beneath that silence, something else was stirring, something calm, patient, and unyielding. Because the thing about silence is, it remembers. And that day, she thought she'd taken everything from me, But she only planted the seed of my silence, and silence remembers. The first morning after losing my job, I woke to a silence that felt heavier than sleep. No alarm, no emails. No reason to rush. Just stillness. The kind that hums inside of your head until it becomes unbearable. The light through my curtains was soft, almost merciful, but it landed on the box from the office still sitting by the door. A cardboard grave for 7 years of my life. My blazer hung over the chair, creased and tired like it had also been fired. I made coffee out of habit, not need. The sound of it dripping was the only proof that time was still moving. When I sat down at the kitchen table, my laptop stared back at me like an accusation. Job portals, application forms, endless listings written in the same sterile tone, dynamic environment. Team player. Must be adaptable. I have been nothing but adaptable. And yet here I was disposable. I sent out 5 applications that morning, 10 the next day. Each one was a small act of hope disguised as desperation. Days blurred. Hope thinned. Rejection emails arrived like clockwork, polite, efficient, heartless. We regret to inform you, while your qualifications are impressive, I stopped reading them fully after a while. You can only be told no so many times before the word starts echoing in your chest. The rent reminder on my phone glowed like a silent threat. Groceries became math. Coffee became luxury. My world shrank to the walls of my apartment. For white witnesses to my quiet unraveling. At night, I'd replay that meeting with Clara. Her careful tone. Her deliberate words. The way she smiled when she said it's just restructuring. But there had been something else. A flicker in her eyes when I asked, why me? It wasn't pity. It was fear. Subtle, buried deep, but real. Back then, I hadn't noticed it. Now, I couldn't unsee it. Weeks passed. The silence grew teeth. I began writing to cope. Journaling, mostly. Not poetry or reflections. Just facts. The date of the meeting. Exact phrases Clara used. Who was in the room before and after. The HR memo that never matched her explanation. It started as therapy. But soon it felt like investigation. Each line revealed something I hadn't seen before. A contradiction. A detail out of place. Like a puzzle slowly rearranging itself into a shape I was finally ready to recognize. One night, as rain traced lines down my window, I found myself rereading the official termination letter. I'd read it a dozen times before. But this time, one sentence caught my attention. Your role has been dissolved effective immediately in accordance with Section 4B of company policy. Section 4B. I opened the employee manual I still had saved from onboarding. My fingers trembled as I scrolled, and there it was. Section 4B applied only to performance-based terminations. Not restructuring. The air left my lungs. Clara hadn't just fired me, she had falsified the reason. That discovery didn't bring comfort. Not at first. It brought nausea. Because suddenly, every polite word, every practiced smile, turned into proof of deceit. I sat there for hours, surrounded by documents, printouts, and my own handwriting. The kitchen clock ticked like it was counting down to something. I realized then that unemployment wasn't just an absence of work. It was a mirror. It forced me to see who I was without a title, without validation, without the illusion of belonging. And in that reflection, beneath the exhaustion and shame, a faint spark began to form. I started collecting evidence. Quietly, carefully, old emails, meeting summaries, performance reviews that contradicted her restructuring claim. Each file felt like a fragment of my dignity returning to me, piece by piece. I didn't know what I would do yet. I only knew that the silence that once haunted me had changed its shape. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was patience, and patience, I was learning, could be powerful. The next morning, I made coffee again, this time deliberately. The aroma filled the room like a small act of rebellion. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim of circumstance. I felt awake. The box by the door was still there, but it looked different now. Not like a grave, but like evidence. The past, waiting to testify. I looked out the window at the gray city below and whispered to myself, not out of bitterness, but out of quiet realization. I thought I'd lost my voice, until I realized I had been whispering the truth all along. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it begins as a whisper, a single message in a quiet inbox that changes everything. It started one cold Thursday morning. The rain outside had thinned to mist, the kind that lingers just long enough to make the world feel suspended. I was reviewing old HR documents when I saw her name, Lydia Patel. A colleague I hadn't spoken to since the day I left. I hesitated before typing. My fingers hovered over the keys. What was I even asking? For validation. For proof that what happened wasn't just bad luck. Still, I wrote, "Hey Lydia, I hope you're doing okay." Random question. Did Clara ever mention Section 4B when you left? Minutes turned into hours. Then, finally, the notification blinked. Oh God, she used that line with you too? Just 7 words. But they cracked something open. That night I stayed up late, sending quiet messages into the dark to old teammates, contractors, even interns who had vanished without a goodbye. I didn't expect much. Most people prefer distance from corporate ghosts. But one by one, replies began to trickle in. She said my role was redundant, but they hired someone new the next week. They told me my review was poor, but I never even had one. They withheld my last month's bonus, said the budget was frozen. Different stories, same tone, same manipulation wrapped in professionalism. Each message felt like a thread, and I could feel them connecting, invisible lines between people who thought they were alone. By Sunday evening, there were 5 of us on a group chat. Each of us carried a different scar from Clara's reign. Lydia from marketing, Jonah from accounts, Priya, who handled HR data, and Mark, a quiet designer who rarely spoke but kept every document ever sent his way. We called ourselves the Whisper Network. Our first meeting was at a cafe tucked away on a side street, the kind of place where people whispered over laptops and pretended to be invisible. Rain tapped against the glass as I walked in, heart steady but hands trembling just slightly. Lydia was already there, stirring her tea. "You look different," she said softly. "Calmer," I smiled. Maybe because I'm finally done being scared. One by one, the others arrived. There was an awkward politeness at first, strangers bound by injustice. But as the stories began to spill, the air thickened with quiet rage. Jonah pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails. "Look, same phrasing. Restructuring under policy Section 4B. She used it on me too." Priya leaned forward. "Section 4B doesn't even apply to half of these departments. She's been fabricating reasons." And then Mark, the quiet one, opened his laptop. "I think she altered performance records. Look, timestamps, signatures. They don't match the originals." We all stared. Screens glowed between coffee cups, lighting our faces like an unspoken vow. It wasn't just corruption. It was choreography, deliberate, rehearsed, repeated for the first time since losing my job. I felt something close to relief. Not joy, not closure. Just a heavy exhale of realizing it wasn't just me. We met every week after that. Same corner table, same cautious glances at the door. But with each meeting, the fear in our voices began to fade. I started compiling everything, documents, emails, testimonies, organizing them not as evidence of pain, but as proof of pattern. Lydia called it our truth file. Mark suggested encrypted backups. We were amateurs in law, but experts in endurance. At night, I looked at the growing folder on my desktop. It had a simple name, Justice. I knew we weren't ready to confront Clara yet, but step by step the narrative she'd written, one where we were weak, disposable, forgettable, was beginning to unravel. There was a shift inside me then, a moral clarity I hadn't felt in months. I realized revenge in its purest form wasn't about destruction. It was about correction. It was setting the record straight, even if it meant tearing down the lies one file at a time. One evening, after another long meeting, we walked out of the cafe together. The city lights blurred in puddles, reflecting us as a quiet line of silhouettes. Not victims anymore, but witnesses. Lydia touched my arm. "You started this," she said. "You gave us a reason to speak again." I shook my head. "No, Clara started this. I'm just giving her ending a better writer." We laughed, not loudly, but freely. The kind of laughter that feels like permission to heal. When I got home that night, I placed my phone beside the growing stack of evidence and sat in the dark, listening to the rain. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It pulsed, it breathed, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in months, I felt a pulse, not of anger, but of justice learning to breathe. The morning I walked into the law office, the sky was the color of unspoken things, gray muted, waiting to break. Even the air felt heavier, as if the city itself could sense that something quiet was about to shift. I had my folder clutched against my chest, the one filled with months of sleepless nights. messages, and truth. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was everything Clara had underestimated. The office was small but precise. Framed certificates. The faint scent of cedar polish, a clock that ticked with clinical patience. A woman behind the desk smiled politely. "Miss Hale will see you now, Miss Hale." My attorney was calm in the way only people who live among storms can be. Silver hair, steady voice, eyes that didn't flinch when looking at injustice. I sat across from her, nerves and resolve fighting for space inside my chest. "I've gone through something unfair," I began, unfolding the evidence carefully on her desk. "I don't even know if it's worth pursuing." But she lied. She forged. She raised a hand, gentle but firm. "Let's start with the facts." So I told her everything. From the meeting where Clara smiled as she ended my career, to the discovery of the falsified clause, to the whisper network that had become my quiet revolution. She listened without interrupting, her pen gliding across yellow paper, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "Alara," she said, voice even, "this isn't just unfair. It's illegal." The words landed with weight, not like surprise, but confirmation. She violated termination policy, falsified documents, and denied severance in breach of contract. Each of those is actionable together? "That's a case," my breath caught. "A real case?" She nodded once. "A very real one." In that moment, I felt something settle inside me, not victory, but clarity. She began to explain the next steps: legal filings, subpoenas, witness statements, sworn affidavits. Her tone was measured, methodical, but every word felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something larger than me. I handed over the folder. "There's more. Emails, screenshots, testimonies. We kept everything." Her eyebrow lifted. "We?" I smiled faintly. She didn't just wrong me for the first time. Miss Hale smiled too, the quiet kind that meant understanding, not comfort. "Good," she said. "The law listens louder when voices multiply." Over the following weeks, my days blurred into signatures, meetings, and meticulous preparation. Every line of text I reviewed, every document notarized, felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself Clara had taken. I found calm in the rhythm of paperwork. There's a strange peace and structure in rules that, when wielded correctly, can become weapons. Miss Hale taught me that justice isn't dramatic. It's deliberate. "It's not about how loud you fight," she said once while drafting our opening statement. "It's about how precise you are when you strike." At night, I'd sit at my desk surrounded by files, highlighter marks glowing like battle scars across printed pages. The sound of my pen clicking echoed through the apartment like a metronome for vengeance. But vengeance wasn't what I felt anymore. It was something quieter, purpose sometimes. I'd catch myself remembering flashes of the old days, Clara's laughter during meetings, her perfume that lingered in the conference room, her practice warmth that always came with a catch. And beneath each memory, I could now see what I had missed: the subtle hierarchy she built through fear, the way she pitted loyalty against silence. She hadn't just manipulated the system, she had mastered it. Until now, each subpoena that went out felt like thunder gathering in the distance, low, rolling, inevitable. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but I could feel it building. Lydia would text updates late at night. Got my affidavit notarized. Jonah would send scanned documents labeled neatly. Payroll discrepancies, and Priya, always meticulous, had unearthed internal memos, showing that Clara had approved replacement hires for eliminated roles. Every new piece of evidence was a gust of wind against her. "House of Lies." One evening, Miss Hale called. "Her legal team will respond soon," she said. "Be prepared. They'll deny, deflect, delay. But they can't outrun documentation." "Will it go to court?" I asked. There was a pause, the kind that carries the weight of certainty. "Oh, it will," she said. "And when it does, we'll make sure they remember your name." After the call, I stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker against gathering clouds. It had started to rain again, slow, deliberate drops tracing down the glass, mirroring the calm that had replaced my fear. I realized something profound in that moment. Justice isn't a moment of explosion. It's a slow rising tide, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Each signature I placed on paper wasn't just ink. It was reclamation. Each date recorded wasn't just procedure. It was memory transformed into proof. The silence that once haunted me was now my greatest weapon. She had written the script of my downfall, but I had learned how to rewrite endings. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The kind of scent that holds stories of people who came seeking truth, and others who came running from it. Light filtered through tall windows, landing in broken streaks across the polished floor. Just hung in the air like a quiet audience, waiting. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands resting on the smooth grain of the desk. My pulse was steady, almost unnervingly calm. Across from me, Clara arrived, perfectly dressed, chin lifted. Confident, sharp enough to cut glass. She gave me a look that wasn't quite a smile. It was the same look she'd given me the day she fired me, polished, superior, practiced. But there was something different this time. Back then, she'd owned the room. Today, she was only renting it. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The gavel struck once, the sound echoed like thunder sealed inside wood. And just like that, the storm began. Ms. Hill opened her case with quiet precision. No theatrics, no raised voice, just truth, clean, unembellished, undeniable. She laid out the timeline. The false performance reports, the doctored contract clause, the payroll records showing that Clara had diverted funds meant for severance. Each exhibit landed like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Each word a scalpel cutting through the lies Clara had built around herself. I watched her across the room, her jaw tightening, her pen tapping against the table. The confidence she'd worn like armor began to show its cracks. Her attorney tried to interrupt, object, deflect, delay. But the judge's eyes said enough. Truth was having its turn to speak. And it wasn't polite about timing. Then came the testimonies. Lydia took the stand first. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she told the court about the missing payroll files, the intimidation emails, the HR cover dash-ups. Then Jonah followed, explaining how expense reports had been altered to hide severance funds redirected into executive bonuses. Each witness spoke with quiet courage, like they were finally allowed to breathe again. I didn't need to look at Clara to know she felt the room shifting. The same people she once silenced were now building the sound of her downfall. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand slowly, not out of fear, but because I wanted to remember every step. The marble floor beneath me, the faint echo of my heels, the whisper of air conditioning that felt colder than it should have. I placed my hand on the oath Bible and met the judge's gaze. I do. Miss Hale began gently. Ms. Reyes, can you tell the court what happened the day you were terminated? I inhaled, steady. She told me the company had no budget left for my position, that I wasn't eligible for severance because I'd signed a revised contract. And did you sign such a contract? I looked at the paper displayed on the screen, my own signature copied and pasted. No, I said softly. That one. She signed for me. A murmur rippled through the room. The sound of disbelief, of shifting air when truth enters. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just let silence fill the space where her lies used to live. When Clara was called to the stand, she tried to wear the same smile again. It didn't fit anymore. Her words stumbled. Her explanations contradicted themselves. Documents caught her mid-denial. Emails time-stamped her guilt. Each question from Miss Hale drew her further into the web she had spun for years, now turning against her with mathematical precision. I almost felt pity, almost stopped because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar. It whispers, and those whispers cut deeper than any scream. By the time closing statements began, the tension in the courtroom had thickened into something tangible, like the air before lightning strikes. Ms. Hill's voice carried softly across the room. This case isn't about revenge, she said. It's about restoration. It's about proving that dignity doesn't vanish just because someone in power decides it should. When the judge finally began reading the verdict, I barely breathed. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, she said, "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff." The words felt heavy, deliberate, sacred. The defendant, Clara Weston, and the company are ordered to compensate the plaintiff in full, including unpaid severance, damages, and legal costs. The gavel came down once, a sound sharp enough to split the air in two. Across the room, Clara's posture broke. The mask slid off, leaving behind only the truth, pale, small, human. I didn't smile. I didn't look away either. There was no need for triumph when justice had already spoken. As people began to stir, papers rustling, shoes scuffing the floor, I sat still for a moment longer, letting the sound of the verdict settle into the quiet, letting it rewrite the memory of that office, that dismissal, that humiliation. This silence was not emptiness. It was completion. I stood, thanked Miss Hale, and walked out into the corridor. Sunlight streamed through the windows, soft and golden now. The rain had passed, and as a judge's gavel struck again in my mind, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like closure. The check arrived in a plain white envelope. No signatures of apology. No grand gestures. Just ink and numbers, the sum of what I was owed. For a moment, I held it between my fingers, feeling the paper's smoothness. It didn't feel like money. It felt like balance restored, quiet, exact, deliberate, outside my window. The city moved at its usual rhythm. Cars honked, vendors shouted. Life went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. And maybe that was the point. Justice doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives in silence, steady, unassuming, complete. News of the verdict spread quickly. By the end of the week, Clara had resigned. The company released a brief statement, calling it a mutual decision. But those who had worked under her knew the truth. The Queen had finally stepped off her throne. Not because she chose to, but because the ground beneath it had been reclaimed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post online or make speeches. I simply watched it unfold from a distance, as if watching the tide pull back after a long, relentless storm. I had no desire to humiliate her. That was never the goal. What I wanted, what I fought for, was restoration. And restoration, I learned, is quieter than revenge. A week later, I went back. The building stood exactly as it had on the day I left. Tall glass, cold marble, the faint hum of air conditioning behind spotless doors. But as I stepped inside, something had changed, not in the walls or the furniture, in me. The receptionist, a new face, smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I smiled back. "No, just visiting an old chapter." She nodded, probably thinking I was just another nostalgic ex-employee. She wasn't wrong. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open with a familiar sigh. As I stepped inside, my reflection caught on the mirrored wall, calm, composed, unburdened. I remembered the last time I had stood here, clutching a cardboard box. My dignity crumpled inside it. Back then, the ride-up felt endless. Now, it felt weightless. The office floor was quiet, half-lit. Afternoon sunlight poured through the glass, catching on empty desks. It was strange how something that once felt like a battlefield now looked so small. I walked slowly, my footsteps soft against the carpet. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the scent of routine. Clara's old office door was closed. A gold nameplate still hung there, her title engraved in confidence that no longer existed. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some doors, I realized, are meant to stay shut, not out of fear, but out of peace. I turned instead to the window at the end of the hall, the same one I used to stare out of during late nights, wondering if all my effort mattered. Now, it did. Not because of what I'd earned, but because of what I refused to lose. My dignity. It had been taken once, quietly, efficiently, like a theft in daylight. But dignity has a way of finding its way home. Once you stop chasing validation and start holding truth. I left the office as quietly as I had entered. No one stopped me. No one needed to. Outside, the air felt lighter, the city softer somehow. I stopped by a small cafe across the street. The same one where Lydia and I once whispered plans like conspirators of conscience. She met me there again, this time smiling without weight behind her eyes. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said. I nodded. Like waking up after a long storm. She stirred her coffee. "You did it." I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "We did it. All of us who refused to be silent." Her eyes softened and she reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "You gave us back something we didn't even realize we lost." "Dignity?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Hope." For a long time we sat in silence, watching sunlight bend through the cafe window. It wasn't victory we felt. It was release. Later that evening, I walked home alone. The streets were alive, laughter, traffic, music spilling from open shop doors. And I realized something. Life doesn't pause for justice. It just makes room for it. As I unlocked my door, I caught my reflection once more. Not the tired woman who had been fired and humiliated, but someone rebuilt, steadier, quieter. Revenge had never been my destination. Justice was. But what I found along the way was something rarer. Peace. Because in the end, it wasn't about making her fall. It was about standing again without bitterness. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker away for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel the need to fight, or prove, or win. I just existed, whole, enough, unbroken, and as night folded itself over the skyline, I whispered to no one in particular, some victories don't echo. They simply exhale. The morning after the verdict, the world felt different, but not louder, just quieter. I woke up before the sun, not out of habit, but out of peace. The kind of peace that doesn't demand attention, that doesn't need to be named. I brewed coffee, the soft hum of the machine filling the silence, and stood by the window as dawn brushed gold across the city for months. I'd imagined this day would feel like triumph, a grand finale to a long, exhausting fight. But it didn't. It felt still, balanced, like a scale that had finally stopped trembling. The air smelled of rain and something new, renewal, maybe. The streets below were wet and glistening, each puddle catching a piece of the rising light. I watched people move, cars starting, shops opening, unaware that somewhere in this same city, one small chapter of quiet justice had just closed. I didn't call anyone, didn't post, didn't even open the settlement envelope that arrived late last night. It sat on my kitchen table. Plain, sealed, almost irrelevant now, because what it contained wasn't my victory, it was just paperwork. My real reward was the silence. This steady heartbeat of calm. I walked later to the park near my apartment, the same one I used to escape to after she fired me. Back then, I'd sit here for hours replaying every cruel word she said, wondering what I could have done differently. Now, I sat on that same bench and realized I wouldn't change a thing. The air was cool. Leaves rustled gently above. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the far end of the park. Life was carrying on, the way it always does, indifferent to our storms and our victories. And maybe that's what justice truly is, not the sound of applause, but the return of balance. The quiet resettling of what was once thrown off course. I thought of Clara, my old boss, though not with anger anymore. She had resigned, humiliated, yes, but human. The truth had exposed her, not destroyed her, and that mattered to me more than I expected. For a moment, I imagined her in her own silence, sitting somewhere, maybe by her window too, wondering how she lost control of everything she thought she owned. I didn't wish her pain. I wished her understanding. Because real justice doesn't demand suffering, it demands clarity, and maybe, just maybe, she would learn what I had learned the hard way. You can't build power on the backs of others. Without one day sinking under its weight, a breeze passed through, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine. I closed my eyes. In the beginning, I thought justice was something you had to take, wrestle from the hands of those who wronged you. But now, I knew better. Justice isn't taken. It's revealed when truth finally has a space to breathe for months. I had lived with clenched fists, metaphorically, emotionally, spiritually. Now, my hands felt open. Empty, but in the best way. I had lost my job, my confidence, even my sense of belonging for a while. But in return, I had gained something pure, dignity, self-trust, peace. As the sun climbed higher, the light turned softer, less gold, more white. A clean kind of brightness that didn't dazzle, just illuminated. I took one last deep breath, tasting the coolness of morning, and smiled faintly to myself. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about winning. It was about balance. The world, for all its chaos, still has a rhythm, quiet, patient, exact. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can hear it. That soft pulse of fairness that runs beneath everything I had fought, yes, but not to destroy, to restore. To remind myself that being wrong doesn't define you. How you rise after it does. When I returned home, the envelope was still on the table, waiting. I didn't open it. Instead, I placed my hand gently over it, whispered a quiet thank you, not to the court, not even to fate, but to myself, for not giving up when I had every reason to, for choosing dignity over bitterness, truth over noise, stillness over spectacle. Outside, the city had awakened fully, traffic humming, people crossing streets, the world already spinning forward. And I felt ready to spin with it again, not as the woman who was fired, not as the one who sued, but as the one who rebuilt silently, steadily, completely. Because sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones that don't echo. They simply settle like dust after a storm, like light after dawn. I glanced once more at the skyline, where clouds parted gently, revealing a perfect blue, and in that moment, I finally understood. Justice isn't meant to roar. It doesn't demand attention. It just returns balance, then disappears into stillness. Because in the end, justice isn't loud.